Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood, California home. The dramatic end to her sensational career as Hollywood's most celebrated sex symbol since Jean Harlow.
Well, I was awakened by a phone call about 5 a.m. in the morning. It was my son calling me, and he says, "Daddy, you know Marilyn is dead." And I said, "Can't be."
Whitey Snyder, Marilyn Monroe's makeup man and very close confidant.
I was in Italy, and I got a phone call from a journalist, I think an English journalist, and I went into shock, and I remember, it's so strange, that my first reaction was, "I'm so sorry."
Susan Strasberg, actress, daughter of Lee Strasberg, and close friend of Marilyn Monroe.
I picked up the phone and she said, "Your friend, Marilyn Monroe, is dead." I said, yeah, I didn't believe her. Hey, number one, I didn't believe her. Impossible.
Amy Green, wife of photographer Milton Green.
And I went out there, and by that time, I guess it was 8:30, 9 o'clock. And by that time, there was nobody there but an officer sitting in a big cop's car. And I said, "Is Marilyn dead?" And he says, "Yes," and just went on about his business reading the paper.
It was just devastating. I don't think my father ever got over it. He had never had a patient die before that he was taking care of. I mean, from other than a natural sort of heart attack or something like this.
We got the call about Marilyn Monroe from the Westwood Village mortuary, so I decided that I would like to go on the call myself, just out of curiosity if nothing else. And when I arrived at Westwood, there was mass chaos. There were photographers and reporters all milling around the place. They were trying the doors and windows. Obviously, they were trying to get in and get a picture of her in the preparation room. And the first thing I did was go into the office and discuss with Mrs. Hockett, who was the wife of the manager, the fact that they definitely should do something about security.
She was laying in a morgue there for a day or two, and nobody claimed the body. Finally, Frank Taylor, who was a producer, called me, and he said, "Well, could you go down and clean the body?" I said, "Well, certainly." The same time that happened, Joe DiMaggio called, and he said he'd do it.
They next asked me to step into the prep room and assist the embalmer with making her up, dressing her, and putting her in the casket. Well, one of the problems involved is whenever you have an autopsy, it renders a woman pretty flat-chested, and Mrs. Hamrock, who was a partner in the firm, came from the downtown branch and came into the preparation room and was kind of disappointed that she had this appearance. And the embalmer and I explained that it was as a result of the autopsy, and in fact we had used some falsies that the family had given us because they said she always wore them, and they were needed to give the appearance that she was always not wearing a bra. And so Mrs. Hamrock proceeded to reach down inside the dress and retrieve the falsies and throw them in the trash can, and went over and got some cotton batting and started forming new breasts for her. And then when she finished with her, she looked at her, put her hand on her hip, took a couple steps back and says, "Now that looks like Marilyn."
Went over there and did the full makeup on her. Marge dressed her, put her back together again, fluffed her up with boobs and everything, looked like Marilyn used to look, you know, and all that sort of thing, because they'd cut her off to pieces.
It's very obvious when you watch somebody like Whitey Snyder work or Sidney Glaroff that they're very professional. I'm sure it was a very emotional thing for them. And to see her transformed from a person that I could not even recognize to this beautiful china doll laying in that casket, I have to take my hat off to these men.
And the next day, not knowing, never doing a dead person before and worrying of what she's going to look like in the coffin, I went down there about an hour ahead of time, my pockets full of makeup and everything to replace whatever I had to do. And she looked beautiful, and Joe was still there kneeling by the coffin.
Before we were allowed into the chapel, they told us that the family was with the body. And I had thought, well, if she'd had a family, maybe we wouldn't all be here.
Joe had a very strict list of who he'd allow at the funeral. And in fact, it was so bad that it looked like half the people wouldn't come. You know what I mean? And to me, it should have been full. There was only about 50 people there.
This woman had a very good sense of humor, and one night we were talking about when we all die, and she said, I want Ella Fitzgerald to sing, I want Frank to sing, I want everybody to tell champagne, and I want everybody to have a good time. Will you see to that, please?
In the funeral, which I had never seen before, they actually literally opened the casket while we were all sitting there. And, I mean, these guys came up and they moved the flowers back and they unbolted it and they lifted the lid up, and with that, a shock of yellow hair stuck out of the coffin.
Marilyn's mentor and acting teacher, Lee Strasberg, delivered the eulogy.
I know that she would not have wanted us to mourn, but grief is human, and words must be spoken. Marilyn Monroe was a legend. In her own lifetime, she created a myth of what a poor girl from a deprived background could attain. We gather here today knew only Marilyn, a warm human being, impulsive and shy and lonely, yet ever avid for life and reaching out for fulfillment. When she first came to me, I was amazed at the startling sensitivity which she possessed and which had remained fresh and undimmed, struggling to express itself despite the life to which she had been subjected. Others were as physically beautiful as she was, but there was obviously something more in her, something that people saw and recognized in her performances and with which they identified. She had a luminous quality.
I was standing at the back of the chapel when the funeral ended, and the thing that stands out in my mind is that when we opened the doors to the chapel and we started to roll the casket out, it had been very quiet up to that point, and then there was almost like thunderous sounds of cameras clicking. I mean, that's all you could hear, was just thousands and thousands of cameras clicking. There were flash bulbs going on. Most of the decisions about the procedural part of the funeral were made by Joe DiMaggio. He apparently took financial responsibility and therefore was the one that was going to be in charge.
In my tombstone. And I said, yeah, what? She said, here lies Marilyn Monroe, 34, 24, 36, period.
And so Joe and his son and myself were pallbearers, plus with other people who worked at the mortuary. And we did the thing you're supposed to do, walk over there. They put her in the crypt and shoved the thing in, and they put the slab up, and I patted the thing. I was the last one to pat it. I said, okay, honey, sleep tight.
In life after death, Marilyn's dreams live on. Dreams of going to New York City and of becoming the very best actress.
The thing I like the most is to become a real actress. And I remember when I was a kid, sitting in the front row at the movies on Saturday afternoon. And I would never come out of the movie. They'd have to come and get me, and I'd sit in the front row. And I'd think how wonderful it would be to be an actress and so forth. But I didn't really realize about acting. However, I realized more and more the responsibility.
That responsibility meant convincing studio executives like David Brown at 20th Century Fox of her potential.
Fox was a dream factory, as all the studios were in the early 50s. We had 29 producers, endless numbers of actors and actresses. Everybody was under contract, and Marilyn Monroe was under contract. The studio used it as a lever. They could suspend you. You couldn't work elsewhere. They could loan you out. They could offer you roles which you had to take. You had no rights of approval. They were slave contracts.
When I met her in 1954, before any of the plans to break away from the studio, she said to me, "I'm going to come east and study acting with your father." And I thought, oh, sure she is. She won't fit in. He won't take her as a student. What would she do in New York? And about a year and a half later, she showed up.
She came to New York and joined the Actors Studio. And, you know, in this time, she was seeking to be something else. She didn't just want to be this empty, vapid sex symbol forever. So she was really made terrible fun of by people in Hollywood. They were enormously offended at her aspirations. They thought they were absurd.
She loved being in New York. She always disliked California because California to her, Los Angeles, Hollywood represented her unhappiest time.
She, on some level, must have already had a plan. Marilyn was much smarter than most people gave her credit for being.
Darryl Zanuck was pulling his hair, and the phones would ring, and Milton Green, Jay Cantor, and Lou Wasserman, bless his heart. They were the three, they were the troika that was getting the best deal for Marilyn.
Of all the actresses that I knew, and I'm talking about Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn and people that I really respected in the 50s, the only one who had the courage and the wherewithal to start her own production company was Marilyn Monroe.
Milton Green was one of the most gifted celebrity and fashion photographers in post-war New York, regularly contracted to Life magazine and Look magazine and a number of others. He rightly saw in Marilyn something that no one had seen hitherto. And he suggested to her, in fact, that she could triumph over a not remarkable salary and have some more freedom to be a little bit more creative and to take more risks.
She had vanished. She had completely vanished for 6 months. Nobody knew. I mean, they knew that she was vaguely in New York and in Connecticut, but no one had seen her. And Milton also thought it would be a very good idea to make the first statement with Edward R. Murrow.
Milton Green is a photographer. For years, millions of us have seen his pictures on the covers of Look, Life, Vogue, and others. But few people outside magazine and advertising offices ever heard of Milton Green until he became vice president of Marilyn Monroe Productions, Incorporated.
And at 10 o'clock Friday morning, Edward R. Murrow's voice was, you were surrounded with it. Every single room was wired with the speaker.
It's here on 11 acres and 16 rooms that Marilyn Monroe has been spending some of her time since she came to New York. Evening, Milton. Hello, Milton.
Ed, hello.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. And you?
Good. What are you doing there?
Well, we're just going over some pictures.
Tell me, what part of the house are we in now, Milton?
This is the studio.
And where is Mrs. Green and Marilyn?
They're in the kitchen right now.
Well, we can go in and meet them in a minute, I imagine.
All right.
While we have you in the studio, could we take a better look at it?
Yes. We have a camera and some posters.
I gather those pictures on the wall must be your work, aren't they?
Yes.
Let's see, that one would be Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis, wouldn't it?
That's right.
And the next one over, Grace Kelly?
Yes.
Oh, and that's Janet Leigh alone, isn't it?
That's right.
And Ava Gardner.
Right.
Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher.
That's right.
And Audrey Hepburn.
One of the crew, a man by the name of Sandy Bell, 2 minutes before we were supposed to go on, trying to make conversation and be nice and polite, said to the three of us, "It's absolutely wonderful. Millions of people are going to see you." And it was like that same moment in my favorite year, the film, when Peter O'Toole panics, Milton and Marilyn panicked.
Two extraordinary motion pictures came from the creation of Marilyn Monroe Productions. Two extraordinary films that came within one calendar year. Bus Stop and The Prince and the Showgirl.
Bus Stop was the first film that she did after she'd started working with my mother and father. And so it was, in a way, her testing ground. And she was working with the director, Josh Logan, who was very sympathetic to the way of work that she had, which was trying to make what might have been a two-dimensional blonde into somebody with much more dimension. So she really took a chance in breaking that image for the first time, and in doing scenes where it was the first time she got to really cry and have real emotion.
Well, Bus Stop had been a great play on Broadway, and of course the character's just irresistible, this character Cherie, and she is just about as vulnerable as she's ever been in any film. In fact, she did really daring things in that certainly showed she was under the influence of the Actors Studio.
Bus Stop, I think for Marilyn, was in a way the closest that she came on film to beginning to be the new person, which really wasn't a new person, but was the person she had always been, but hadn't been allowed to be by the studio and the parts that they were putting her in. If you think if Marilyn came along now, instead of in the 50s, she would have played, look at the parts that Jane Fonda or Jessica Lange or Michelle Pfeiffer played. Marilyn would have been brilliant.
Marilyn's acting changed because of Joshua Logan and Milton Green. Just like it changed because when Marilyn did Prince and the Showgirl with Larry Olivier and Milton Green.
I don't think Olivier ever forgave Marilyn for being better than him in that movie. But it wasn't a pleasurable experience for her. I'll never forget the shock that she called my father hysterical, and she said, "Lee, he wants me to be sexy." And now, I would like to think that Sir Laurence Olivier said that humorously, but we'll never know. But he actually did have the distinction of saying to Marilyn Monroe, "Marilyn, in this scene, be sexy."
Marilyn lives on today in thousands of photographs, images created by many of the greatest photographers of her day, such as celebrity photographer Douglas Kirkland.
Marilyn was a symbol of who we were in the 50s and early 60s when I photographed her. We were coming out of sort of the dark ages sexually in many ways. The Second World War was over, the fabulous 50s were around, and clearly Marilyn Monroe was a principal symbol of that period.
She got away with causing a sex scandal, which in the studio system and the star system of the early 50s was considered suicide. She had been found out that she had taken some nude photos as a struggling starlet, which became the first Playboy cover in centerfold. And instead of that destroying her career, that launched her career and made her even more famous and more popular.
Hugh Hefner, publisher and founder of Playboy.
I learned that summer when I was first planning the magazine that the classic nude, which nobody had seen, belonged to a calendar company, Baumgarth Calendar Company, out on the west side, not too far from where I grew up. So I got into my 1940 beat-up Chevy and went out there and told the owner that I was starting this new men's magazine, and I think he was a shirt sleeve kind of guy, so that he very much related to the fact that I was trying it. And he sold me the rights to reproduce it in the magazine for $500.
I think that the photographs taken of Marilyn in her lifetime are uncountable because I think it's a funny image to think of anybody who walked by Marilyn with a camera. I think she'd have posed for in her early career. Anybody. And she did, obviously, because there's still all these photographs surfacing after people die and estates are gone through. Someone has a photo of Marilyn they took, someone from a studio. So many men in Korea had cameras that I still get calls from people saying, oh, I found this in my father's locker. There's some photographs of Marilyn that she took. So she really did pose for anybody with a camera in those early days.
In our house, I think, was the one place where nobody was taking pictures of her. There is no picture of her with my whole family, because my mother said there's got to be one place where that woman doesn't have to smile and be on.
She knew exactly when this camera started rolling or the still man started to take a picture. She just came to life. Doing stills, we used to work at night for some reason over there at night. And she liked caviar and champagne.
It's often said that Marilyn was great with still photographers. She really was. It was an art form for her. It was part of her art. She didn't see stills as being a waste of time. She enjoyed the still camera. In fact, perhaps more even than the motion picture camera in some ways. I was in my mid-20s, but mentally about 15. And I worked for Look magazine in New York, and they sent me out here to California to photograph Marilyn for their special anniversary edition. We went to visit her down on Doheny Drive in a small garden apartment she was living in. And the person I saw when I went in was quite different than the Marilyn that I thought I was going to see. I saw somebody who was, well, she could have been my sister. You know, it was like a real person, the girl next door, you name it. But it was not the ba-boom that I expected. Finally, the night came of the shoot, which was a few days after that first meeting. And I waited nervously, and in typical fashion, Marilyn was a little late, not terribly late, and it was a night shoot, as has often been said, and champagne, Frank Sinatra records, you know, you name it. I'm sure that everybody knows about it by now, but this was the atmosphere that was to be established, and we had it all. With Marilyn, it was sexual play. It was really foreplay was what it was. And I don't mean that in any negative sense, but it was wonderful because she played that game so well. We started shooting for a while, and it went reasonably well. And then at a certain point, she said, I want all you to leave the room. I want to be alone with this boy. And I thought to myself, what the hell's going on, you know? I mean, but being a photographer, I thought, keep the camera going. So I kept shooting, and I was delighted. I thought, we're going to get to the real stuff is going to happen now.
We were the last innocence, we were the last elegance, we were the last remnants of the American dream. You guys wind up with Madonna. So, that ain't real. That is brilliant merchandising.
Well, I think that one of the things that is remarkable about Marilyn Monroe is that she represents a lot of things to a lot of people. One of the things that makes her so much a part of the American mythology is that a great many people see in her some part of themselves. She is used by Gloria Steinem and others as a symbol of feminism. She represents sexual liberation to some. She represents a victim to others.
Marilyn's move from the camera to the paintbrush launched a whole new American art form called pop. Peter Max.
It was the whole pop art scene that in the 50s created icons. Andy Warhol, Lichtenstein with his comic books, Andy with his Campbell soup, Marilyn Monroe. And they took on a new form, you know, a form everybody recognized, yet it had another form to it. The way Andy took the Marilyns and made 10 Marilyns, and he made them in all different juxtaposition of colors, and she took on a new life. There were parts in the Warhol collection of Marilyn Monroe that was bigger in art than Marilyn was.
Oh, well, she was just perfect for Andy Warhol in that she could be this repeating image, which was a part of his thing, like, you know, rolls of stamps, the same picture over and over again. I think that she's gone into the popular culture in so many ways. Her images are still everywhere, and this enduring quality about her, she never became dated. She didn't become campy.
Everyone from Andy Warhol, who actually started, I think, the art phenomenon, to lesser-known artists have done busts, statues, paintings, cutouts, greeting cards, you name it, it's done. She has infiltrated every form of art that you can imagine.
If I'm in a pinch and I need extra cash, I can always do a Marilyn Monroe. And next to Judy Garland and James Dean, she sells. And I know that's very crass to say, but I am a commercial artist, and I can always rely on the kindness of Marilyn.
You know, she was everybody's dream. She was the epitome of what girls were. Of course, today things have changed, but she's still, you know, this tremendous icon. I think in every photograph, she's so much right on camera, facing you, being who she really is. And I mean, in all of these photographs, she's right there. She's not even striking a pose. She's just being herself. Very innocent, kind of naive. You know what we should do in honor of Marilyn? Right over here. A little halo, for old time's sake. She's now been made a saint.
Yeah, Saint Marilyn. In 1967, New York's most prestigious art gallery honored Monroe by exhibiting psychedelic images created by some of the world's greatest artists. Carol Janis of the Janis Gallery.
My dad had an idea that he wanted to do a homage to Marilyn Monroe because so many artists seem to have been taken with her image, and she was introduced into many works of art. We decided to do a multimedia room, and we asked Milton Green if he could lend us anything, and he offered to lend us some wonderful outtakes and home movies he had of Monroe. And we used those in an installation with double film projecting one above the other. And we had a special room with which everyone came and sat on the floor. And then this whole wall of images.
Behind me is the painting by Andy Warhol of Marilyn 100 times. And what it is 100 images of Marilyn Monroe screened onto the canvas. And this was one of a series of paintings which Warhol did in 1962.
The 100 Marilyns, $2 million to start.
We think that the actual auction process of selling the painting will take about a minute. And we expect the painting to fetch, as I say, we expect it to make a record maybe in excess of $5 million.
At $2,900,000 for it, $3 million. I have $3 million in the center of the room now, $3,000,001.
The record for any Warhol at the moment is a little over $4 million, and it was for a single image of Marilyn.
At $3,400,000, the bid is up front, on the phone, sold for $3,400,000.
By the late 1970s, Monroe had become an icon, churned out as dime store figurines, posters, postcards, and lookalikes. Merchandise which is stamped, duplicated, and mimicked has annual revenues in the millions.
Some friends and I started Marilyn Monroe 10 years ago, just for fun. Homemade wine made in my carport. A few years later, we realized it had some commercial potential, so in 1987, we produced our first business, Marilyn Monroe.
Well, our store is called Reminiscence, and it's a lot about retro stuff about the 50s, and Marilyn Monroe is an important part of our merchandise here since she's part of the 50s, and James Dean and people like Flintstones, and we sell a lot of novelty things, but Marilyn Monroe is definitely one of our most popular sellers here.
Well, they've certainly given her, you know, super adoration. If actors are all looking to be adored and loved, she certainly could look down from heaven or up from hell or wherever she is and see that she is adored and venerated. People wear her on their ties, they put her on their t-shirts, they put her on their walls, they love her, they do retrospectives of her films, even though she had really a very small body of film.
It's apparently, you know, anything in this world, including this film, will be manufactured if there's an audience for it. So, in the end, the vast variety of merchandise available with Marilyn's image complements Marilyn in an odd way, because it means the audience is there for it, or it wouldn't be manufactured.
Everybody would love to have a picture somewhere of Marilyn Monroe. Whether they buy it, they find it, they steal it, they'll take it. And it's just amazing that she has this power, of this magnetic power over people 30 years after she's passed. You know, the Sharper Image, she's on the cover of Sharper Image.
When people come in to buy Marilyn Monroe memorabilia, it's for maybe just to have a piece of her, maybe to have something of what she was, something of her talent and her brilliance.
There's bound to be a lot of people who buy it just because it's a Marilyn Monroe item. These are the hardcore fans that seem to be scattered throughout the country. These wines have a life of 5 or 10 years before they start to decline, but it would seem that Marilyn is going to go on forever.
Dressing up in costume is making fun of the thing you're representing on the face of it. In point of fact, being in a costume is deeply serious. It is a real identification. I want to be that creature. I really want to be that creature. And dressing up as Marilyn means I want to be Marilyn.
Friend, a kiss may be grand, but it won't pay the rent on your humble flat.
It's astonishing how many people out there love the legend of Marilyn Monroe. She's requested as if she's still alive.
So hot. Is there like a fan somewhere?
Did you ever wonder what happens to your things once you die?
What I have right here is a purse of hers, a makeup purse, and if you open it up, you could smell the makeup that she used to carry in there. So that's really special, and people beg me to, let them have a smell at it, but I really don't, because it's going to wear out. It's for me.
As I explained, a little bit of surgery had to be performed on the back of her neck to reduce the swelling, and it was necessary to cut some of the hair from the back of her head, and of course the embalmer placed that in the trash container, where also the falsies ended up after Mrs. Hamrock removed them. And because my wife was so adamant that I be very attentive and know what was going on and be able to come and describe to her at night what all the details were, I walked over and reached into the trash can and removed some of the hair and the falsies, which I still have to this day.
It's a handkerchief that belonged to Marilyn. It has her initial on it. I keep it with me all the time.
You want relics from the saints. You want relics from the gods, see. And why? Because to touch the relic is to touch this, not just the body, but the spirit itself. And to identify with the spirit of a goddess like Marilyn is really to have a kind of epiphany in one's life.
She probably gets something out of all these people that are collecting and admiring her even after all this time.
If her death were a board game, which clue would you have chosen? Drugs? CIA operatives? Mafia hitmen? The president's brother? Her psychiatrist? Or did the housekeeper do it?
As many theories as there are to make money, there's a theory on how she was killed. I think that the thing about her death is it still sells, and there's still a mystery around it. As long as they can milk that, and they will milk it forever, you're going to have movies and books about this theory about her death, that theory. There's the accidental death, there's the plot by the mafia, there's a plot by our own government, there's the plot by the studio. There's so many different plots that you can fabricate.
It is a cottage industry now. There are hundreds of people, maybe more than that are making a living out of reviving it, coming forward, getting their name in the paper, making accusations which are, to my satisfaction, untrue.
Sam sent 4 hitmen to Marilyn's house that night.
It was one of the operatives of the CIA who was a sympathizer of the Kennedys, both Bobby and Jack.
Robert Schleitzer? I have a problem with Schleitzer.
The first visualization we got was of Bobby Kennedy and a man named Dave.
It was my conclusion that Miss Monroe did not commit suicide.
I think that because more and more people who really knew her have died, and that since there seems to be a license to say anything, you can be as crazy as you want to be and make accusations and somebody will take you seriously.
There are a lot of inconsistencies.
There was a doctor present who took out a huge syringe filled with a brown liquid material and shoved it into her heart.
It is absolutely not possible that such an injection took place.
There have been so many rumors about suicide and overdoses, accidental deaths.
It was not suicide. It was not an accidental overdose.
She asked us to tell her story to the public so that the truth would come out.
Nobody cares anymore what the truth is. It's more interesting to have all the speculation. And the wilder the speculation, the more interesting it gets. So I think that even Marilyn herself is lost in this. It amazes me that people who find out that I knew her and who are big fans never asked me about the real person because they're not interested. They want the illusion.
The real Marilyn, the real human being, the person beyond the myths, the merchandise, and the mysteries, is only now, in the 90s, beginning to emerge.
Marilyn Monroe deserves a complete and thorough biography that takes into consideration not presumptions and half-truths about her family background and her childhood, to say nothing of the confusions and lies and misconceptions and misrepresentations about the end of her life. But one needs to write about Marilyn Monroe in order to tell the truth about this extraordinary, wonderful, courageous, brave, trailblazing, ordinary, extraordinary human being.
Well, when I started doing this book, I had a perception of Marilyn. I liked her movies, I liked her okay, but I didn't think I'd like her as a person because the way she had been perceived by the public was what the publicity department wanted you to see, this sexy, dumb blonde type of woman. And she was not that at all. I mean, this was an intelligent woman. She was a woman who knew what she wanted. She had a mind of her own. I mean, look where she came from. This was a woman who had everything going against her, and look where she went.
Marilyn Monroe went through so many classic stages of growth and change. She accomplished so much and endured so much in such a short space of time that we today forget that she died so young, just shortly after her 36th birthday.
When she died, she was an icon on the world celebrity scene. And then her shroud became a mantle for this fantasy idea of her as the victim. I just don't think that's true. I think she was a woman who had really almost achieved her goals. If you look at the pictures of her taken right before she died, I don't know if they're Milton's pictures or someone else. They're just wonderful.
Since she died, we've added a large component to her, which turns her from merely an icon into an absolute goddess. And she is now a cultural goddess without any question, and will remain one, I think, for a long time. Not just in terms of definition, but in terms of devotion.
What we saw in Marilyn Monroe was not only rampant sex appeal and a great sense of humor, a great sense of self. She was able to have fun with her sexuality. But at the same time, she lived her life out in such a public way with the pain and the tragedy of the marriages and the suicide attempts. You felt as if you were a part of her life.
Many things to many people, but finally I think what made her so enormously popular is that there was a great general consensus in the middle that she was that sort of absolutely marvelous girl next door that everyone had always wanted to grow up next to. Her greatest gift was that combination of intimacy and tenderness that she offered. I think Milton Green, in my opinion, took the best photographs of her that we've ever seen, and that's saying a great deal because some of the best photographers in the world took some fabulous stuff of her. She was a brilliant model, but that set of pictures that Milton took, where she was in black lingerie and black net stockings, and I guess a black bustier and so forth, and wearing a black top hat, absolutely exceptional stuff. You know, just some of the best photographs ever taken of a lady, a blonde lady, not wearing much, and all of it in black.
That will keep me loving you. And with your permission, I would like to list a few. The way you wear your hat, the way you sip your tea, the memory of all that. No, no, they can't take that away from me, the way your smile just beams, the way you sing off-key, the way you haunt my dreams. No, they can't take that away from me. We may never, never meet again on the bumpy road to love. Still, I'll always, always keep the memory of the way you hold your knife, the way you mumble till 3, the way you change my life. Oh, no, they can't take that away from me. No, they can't take that away from me.
I was in love with her like every single male creature in the United States and around the world. And I still am. That's why I think I understand Marilyn's image so well. I love her, I adore her, I use her in the same way that all men do.
She was your fantasy. Whatever guys do at night in the privacy of their own heads, she was there. That's, I think, why she still remains. She is able to get into your head and into your brain. And there isn't a man in the world that doesn't appreciate that. She wasn't the most beautiful. She wasn't the most educated. She wasn't the most intelligent. She was lucky to be able to get in the heads and brains of every guy that ever looked at her.
Marilyn Monroe is one of the most human beings that I ever met in my life. And I think it's because she showed us her humanity.